Mr. Darden, thanks so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Now, you've been one of the best known lawyers in America for 30 years. Why seek the bench now?
Well, I think it's time for me. I think judges ought to be experienced or have experience. And now that I'm in the 44th year of my legal career, 44 years as a member of the California bar, I've been on both sides of the counsel table as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney. I've been a law professor, associate law professor at a law school here. I continue to teach criminal law and crime scene investigation at Santa Monica Community College, and I've done so much and I've seen so much. And I think that with experience and even age, okay, comes wisdom. And I just think it's the right time for me personally, and I think it's the right time for the law. I think LA law needs someone like me on the bench with that experience and someone who I like to think of myself as being someone who has the courage to do the right thing under the law.
Why, at the outset of your career, did you go towards prosecution, go towards litigating cases on that side of the aisle?
I will tell you, when I came out of Hastings Law School in San Francisco, I wanted to be a labor lawyer. And I applied for a job with the NLRB, and NLRB jobs, the National Labor Relations Board jobs, were hard to get. And imagine it's 1980 where mortgage interest rates are 16%, and we're in the middle of a recession. And I finally got a job with the NLRB, but it was in Los Angeles. And so I moved to Los Angeles and joined the NLRB, and my salary at the time was $15,000 plus dollars, and I had a newborn daughter back up in Northern California. I had a newborn daughter back up in Northern California, and I couldn't afford to support my daughter. And I looked for a better job. And so I looked in the legal newspaper and I saw an advertisement, deputy DAs. And guess what? The annual salary was $25,800. So of course I applied. And that began my career as a prosecutor. It's not how I thought things would start out for me. It's not what I planned. It was life taking me in that direction.
Did you always want to be a trial lawyer?
Well, I always admired trial lawyers, and people say they want to be a trial lawyer until they get in trial. I know you've been in trial, and you know that it is very taxing. It requires a special skill. But I admired the great trial lawyers of the 60s and the 70s, growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area. Of course, there were a number of political trials and just some fantastic trial lawyers back then. And yeah, I liked that idea. I liked the idea of being a trial lawyer and being a civil rights lawyer too. But I never imagined trying cases would be what I did for the next 40 plus years.
What does it take to be a good trial lawyer?
Practice and preparation. Practice and preparation. I don't think anybody goes into their first trial being a great lawyer. And all of us who try cases, we know, who the neophytes are when they first show up in the courtroom. And I think that you have to pay attention, prepare, but you have to work on the skills that are necessary to be a good trial lawyer. Not everybody can conduct a thorough or an appropriate direct examination, let alone cross-examination. I think you have to practice those things. And I think you have to know the rules of evidence. You have to be able to think on your feet. One of the things I see in trials all the time is I see these lawyers going at it, and one lawyer objects. And before the judge can even rule, the other lawyer says, okay, I'll withdraw the question. I'm like, what the heck? No, if you object to me and the judge sustains the objection and I think it's wrong, I'm going to ask the same question. And if the judge tells me not to ask the same question, I'm going to ask the same question 13 different ways until I get an answer and ask the question in the form that the court would prefer. And I think that that takes skill and training and experience. I think good trial lawyers don't allow themselves to be ruffled or to be distracted.
Now, you were initially assigned to gangs, my understanding is, and then special investigations. What were those two bureaus designed to do?
Well, I was assigned to the hardcore gang unit in the DA's office in the early to mid 1980s, and in Los Angeles, let me tell you, during that time period, the homicide rate, the rate, frequency of gang shootings was just unimaginable, far worse than we see today. And so, in the gang unit, you were assigned as a prosecutor 15 cases, which included a minimum of 10 murder cases. All the cases were life cases, meaning the defendants were facing life sentences. And, you know, back then I'd put on a bulletproof vest, grab my little 380 semi-automatic pistol, and I'd go out with the LAPD and the sheriff's department, and I'd be right there at the back door, the third guy in, executing search warrants. But you know, our posture was to do everything that we could do to protect the community and stamp out as much gang violence as we could. In special investigations, we investigated officer-involved shootings, and we also investigated in custody deaths of inmates. So I spent years out there on the street, at the scene, participating in the crime scene investigations, and you know, we rooted out a lot of bad cops back then, and we prosecuted some in some cases, and in other cases, we provided the evidence that was needed to cause an officer to be disciplined, if not terminated, you know, based on what we perceived as administrative or legal misconduct.
How has policing changed in California since that time over these past few decades?
Well, you know, that's a good question because when I joined the DA's office in the 1980s, the police chief was Daryl Gates. The LAPD ran this thing called Operation Hammer, where they would essentially send in 100 units into a, you know, 10 square block area and literally stop everyone and everything moving, proning people out in the street and on the sidewalk. It was a very heavy-handed form of law enforcement. I thought at the time that it violated the rights of average citizens, and it was that kind of attitude, treatment, you know, by police back then that I think contributed to the 1992 riots after the Rodney King verdicts. Today, there's more community policing. I think the relationship, really, in LA, between communities of color, I think is certainly much better than it was 30 years ago. But you know, a lot has happened in law enforcement, and you know, we've passed laws in California to ensure that defendants charged with crimes receive all of the evidence that they ought to receive, including exculpatory evidence. They've made it a felony for prosecutors to withhold that evidence, and obviously under Brady, if the police withhold exculpatory evidence, that taints the prosecution's case and it taints the prosecution. I think that there is a greater appreciation for the community in terms of law enforcement today. You know, I spoke to some deputies yesterday, and I know that a lot of law enforcement officers in this community and all across the country really feel like they're underappreciated and under siege, which I don't think is necessarily the case. But I think there's a greater awareness and greater appreciation between law enforcement and the communities they serve today. There has to be. I mean, after what we saw with George Floyd and some of the other really outrageous incidents and events we've seen over the past 5 years, I think it's put law enforcement on notice. And I think a lot of departments have taken notice. But of course, we still see things that we don't approve of and conduct that we don't approve of. And when we see it, you know, we try to root out the problem and root out the problem officers.
You mentioned a minute ago prosecutorial misconduct as a problem that persists. Um, Prosecutorial discretion is a loud phrase. And that is because prosecutors have so much authority, so much subjective decision making power. Do you see that as problematic? Is there any way to fix it or at least curb it to some degree?
Well, I don't see it as problematic. I can tell you that I've practiced in different states and obviously practiced all across California. And, in every county, the terminology is different, the attitude is different, some more conservative than others, some prosecutors more conservative than others. I mean, I'm in LA County. If I go to the west, there's Ventura, which is, I think, more conservative. To the south is Orange County. I think they are more conservative. Riverside, San Bernardino to the east. Also, I think that they're more conservative than we are in Los Angeles. But overall, for me, in my experience as a criminal law defense attorney over the past 25 years, I typically see deputy DAs, prosecutors, and even assistant U.S. attorneys exercising their discretion in an appropriate way. I rarely encounter situations where the prosecutor is hostile to me and my client. And I rarely encounter situations where what they want is just so far over the top that that I have to question or be concerned about their own prosecutorial bias. I think we do pretty good here. I think as a lawyer, you have to develop a reputation um, amongst prosecutors. I mean, I think most prosecutors know that I'm a straight shooter, that I mean what I say, uh, that I'm a good trial lawyer, that I'm not afraid, and that I will do, what I have to do and what is required of me. I took an oath, and I'm going to live up to that oath, and I'll fight. And I think when everybody understands who you are, uh, when prosecutors understand that they can trust what you say, when you build up a relationship and even a reputation, I think that helps a lot too. But by and large, I don't have a big problem with prosecutorial discretion. Now, here in Los Angeles County, the district attorney is George Gascon. He is a progressive district attorney. He's under siege by his own deputies. A lot of folks don't buy into his program in terms of reformative justice. But for the most part, I think we do pretty good in Los Angeles, quite frankly. You know, um, you know, my hat's off to the court, the bench, and to the prosecution side of the bar.
What criminal justice issue do you see as most problematic these days in California and elsewhere, perhaps? Is it bail reform? Is it discovery? Is it policing? Is it something else?
You know, um, that is a question that's a book. That is a book unto itself because, and I'm kind of smiling about it because every time I think about it, and folks ask me this question in a variety of different ways and forms, and I'll be honest with you, it is one of the most complicated questions and issues imaginable here in California. We have a legislature that is hell bent on reformative justice, and they have enacted laws which oftentimes I think are entirely appropriate and fair and equitable. And now we're at this stage. We're in the midst of all of this social justice reform on the one hand, and then there are all these other factors that are playing into all of this. In the California Department of Corrections and the prison system, because of Proposition 47 and other programs, inmates are not doing as much time as they used to do. We have reduced certain crimes from felonies to misdemeanors, like personal possession uh, of narcotics. We've elevated the amount of money required to cause a theft to become a felony. You'd have to steal an item valued at more than $950 for that theft to, constitute a felony. We are focusing on mental health and veterans issues, and judges now have the power to grant judicial diversion, meaning that not everybody has to plead guilty or go to jail or go to prison. That they can work in programs to rehabilitate themselves. And we have all of this social justice reform on the one hand, and at the same time we are seeing property crimes being committed, by groups of 40 in the middle of the afternoon in the presence of 100 witnesses, while they're on 1080p quality surveillance cameras. And so we're seeing people really undermine the criminal law, and I think undermine the restorative justice effort, because these people don't expect to go to jail because of new laws in California relative to bail, the posting of bail or not in cases involving misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies. So we have all of these things going on, and I think law enforcement is, feels like they have their hands tied. It's just, I don't know how we work through this, because we can't exist in the current condition, in the present condition, at least, where people are committing crimes wholesale as if there is no consequence. I watched a video a couple of weeks ago. A mob of people rushed into a bakery in Compton. And of course, they took the cash register, but they took a lot of other stuff too. And, it's a small business, family-owned business, as I recall. And, and they're on surveillance camera, and they're not wearing masks. They're just blatantly doing it. And, we have to protect those small businesses. Those small businesses, not only do they drive the local and neighborhood economy, but they help to define our neighborhoods. And we have to do something to help those small and large business owners who are being subjected to this. I don't know what you do. I know the legislature is looking at this and concerned about it. Law enforcement is too. I'm just a country lawyer, but I know we have to address it. The reforms we have in California are new, and we're all working through them, trying to achieve the legislative objective, which is fairness and equity, and due process on the one hand, and on the other hand, and at the same time, to protect the community. And it's a process, and it's a learning process. I don't know if I answered your question, but I'm just perplexed about all of this. And I know a lot of other people are, but at the end of the day, what matters is fairness. And we have to continue to tweak the system to make sure it's fair to defendants, to victims, and to the community as a whole.
Now, I took a look at your website, campaign website, and I saw endorsements from Gil Garcetti and Kim Goldman, Lance Ito.
Yes.
It's tough to talk to Chris Darden without mentioning the OJ Simpson trial to some degree, right? What impact do you think that trial had on the way Americans generally perceive how the criminal justice system works?
Well, when the verdict came in back in 1995, it was clear that there was a racial divide in terms of who felt he was guilty, who felt he wasn't, in terms of who felt he was properly vindicated in court, and those who felt that he got away with, double murder. In California back then in the 90s, we watched Rodney King beaten without mercy, and we watched the officers walk away. And we had existed in an environment where for years, the sort of heavy-handed Operation Hammer type law enforcement had been practiced in the communities of color in Los Angeles. And so you had this perfect storm of resentment and lack of trust in the system. When the OJ Simpson case came up and came out, and and I think the verdict forced people to discuss the question or the issue of there being two systems of justice, in this country and in California. There's one for the rich. Many people felt and a different one for the poor. I think that for a lot of people, it was an educational moment, a teaching moment. Um, it allowed people to see what actually goes on in court, which nobody had really seen before or paid attention to. And everybody could see that justice is not perfect. The law is not perfect. The best thing I think, or a few things that came out of the Simpson case was a focus on domestic abuse. All across the country, there are millions of women who live in homes and who are at risk of being injured or beaten or murdered or abused. And we shined the light on that issue, and I think that was important, and I think people learned a lot from it. Of course, um, people say, "Well, I want justice. I want justice." Well, the only way to get justice is to participate and to be a constant observer. I picked a jury. I was picking a jury, and there was a panel of about 90 potential jurors. And of all those potential jurors, all 90, there was one African American male. One potential juror was an African American male out of 90. Out of 90 people. And perhaps another 5 were African American women. Out of 90 potential jurors. And I'll tell you what, when we finally got to the African American male, the only one on the panel, it turned out that he was an FBI agent. And this was a criminal case involving 50 counts of assault with a deadly weapon and armed robbery. Where are my brothers? We have to participate. We have to be present. We have to be gatekeepers to ensure that there is fairness and there is justice. And I don't say that just to African Americans or people of color, but everybody. Everybody. We all have to come down. Even I go down there. When I get a jury summons, I go down there. They won't take me. They won't pick me. But let me tell you, I show up, and we all have to show up.
How has your reputation in the general public as a result of the OJ trial impacted your work as a professor, as a defense lawyer, as a trial lawyer, as somebody who is obviously and has been practicing law for all these years? How has what you did in that case impacted your career going forward?
Well, that's a good question. The Simpson verdict was such a hot topic issue back in the 90s, and I left the DA's office. I literally packed up my office the day after the verdict, and I had begun teaching at Southwestern University Law School, and I went on to become an associate professor. And so for 5 years, I was teaching in the classroom and moving away from the verdict and moving toward healing myself, and I suppose in some ways healing my reputation, in the local community. After teaching, I became a civil rights attorney, which I always wanted to be, and I became a criminal law defense attorney. And when you look at my record, what you will see is not just me standing up for victims in OJ Simpson, but you will see me standing up for the rule of law. You'll see me representing defendants who are not exactly desirable or favored. What you see is me standing up for the Fifth and Sixth Amendment rule of law, the right to due process, the right to the effective assistance of counsel. And, and over time, I think my reputation has changed. I'm not sure what it was before. I know some people loved Chris Darden and some people didn't, and it's probably the same way today. But I hope I have a reputation of being someone who will stand up for the Constitution and stand up to power, because that is the reputation that I would like to have. That's how I'd like to be. Not just for OJ Simpson. I've represented so many people in the last 25 years, and so many kinds of different cases. I'd be in a situation where I'm representing someone who is accused of killing a popular rapper, and I'm catching all kinds of hell in the public. But at the same time, I'm representing someone who ran over a child, and nobody says anything. About that. I don't really care about my reputation in the community. What I care about is people knowing that I'm going to stand up. I'm going to stand up for poor people. I'm going to stand up for the rule of law. I'm going to stand up for fairness. A lot of things were said. I was looking at a Johnny Cochran's book from the 90s. I think it was called Journey to Justice. And I'll tell you that he inscribed a copy of his book to me. And I haven't really talked about this anywhere, but let me talk about it. It was 1996, and a number of us had written books after Simpson, and I was on a book tour, and I found myself in a small radio station in East Texas. And as I finished my interview and I'm walking out, Reverend Al Sharpton is walking in. I never met Reverend Sharpton, and we stopped and we talked a while, and Reverend Sharpton said to me, he said, it's not a great thing to have, two brothers, two high-profile black lawyers at odds with each other. That's not a great thing, for the community. And I'd admired Johnny Cochran for years. And I said, yeah, you're right, Reverend, you're right. And he was going to see Johnny in a couple of days somewhere. And I inscribed the book to Johnny, and Johnny inscribed the book to me. And I was thinking about him the other day, and I picked up his book, and he said in his inscription to me, he said, we've been through a lot. A lot has been done, and a lot has been said. And he said, but at the end of the day, just know that you're my brother. I love you and I respect you, and I always want good things for you. And that's what he basically said. And I've carried that book around for almost 30 years. And it means a lot to me. It means a lot to me. I know people think, well, this and that, but it means a lot to me, and I believe what he said. I believe it. And at the end of the day, when all is said and done, all we can do is stand on our values and principle and do what we were, committed to doing, him and me, which is pursue justice.
And look, I will say, this trial was the most well-known trial probably in American history. And you were a part of that. And you did good work. And you did work over an extended period of time. And certainly there are some negatives and you caught some flack and other things. But that's got to be a good feeling. That's a part of your career that very few people get to emulate, if any, ever. And that's got to be something that makes you feel good at the end of the day as a lawyer.
And it does. I say to people, whatever you think about me, I walk the walk, I talk the talk, and I back it up. I am not perfect. Lord knows I am not perfect, not as a human being, not as a man, certainly not as a lawyer. But my love for my community and my love for these constitutional principles of fairness and justice and due process and equality is unbending. And um, and I'm proud. I'm proud of it. I tell you, it hurts sometimes. Uh, it made for a lot of lonely days and nights and the like. It was life altering, but at the end of the day, when I'm done, I want to feel like those NFL players in the Super Bowl, those track stars in the Olympics. I want to feel like I left it all on the field, left it all on the track. I gave it all that I could, and there's only so much I can do as an individual and as an individual lawyer, but I know that I made a difference in the lives of a whole lot of people. And I know that I met a lot of people for whom after I left, their life was better. They were in a better position than they were when I found them. And, and that's how you're anointed. That's how you know that you've done the work, you've done the job. And I like to think that I have. And I'm not asking anybody to celebrate me or celebrate that, because I've quietly gone about just being a criminal law defense attorney for 25 years, and I don't usually take high-profile cases. I've turned down a lot of cases. A lot of lawyers would give their right arm for it, because my gift isn't in being in the media. My gift is in saving people who can't save themselves and speaking for people who either can't speak for themselves or who, if they speak, aren't heard. Um, and that's what I've tried to give back, to this community and to the law. And um, nobody's going to name a school after me or a street or anything like that. I'm gonna, I'm just gonna leave it on the field, leave it on the track. San Jose State, 1977, 400 meters. I'm just going to do the thing, and God willing, when I walk away from this, I will have done it, everything I was supposed to.
Mr. Darden, I think you're being humble. You're a part of American history. You cemented your place in American history. You did that with your hard work and your effort. And I thank you for speaking with me, finding the time to share your insights, your experience, your positions on various topics. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.